3 weeks passed, and the humans did nothing interesting. That was the general opinion on Concord Station, and most species were happy to keep it that way. Danny attended sessions. He sat in the back, because quarter-status species were not given seats at the main table. And he listened. He listened to trade disputes between species that had been arguing over the same asteroid belt for 600 years. He listened to military agreements between powers that could glass a planet before lunch. He listened to the small, desperate pleas of minor species who came to the Concord looking for protection and found only bureaucracy. He took notes. He asked polite questions that nobody answered with any seriousness. He thanked everyone for their time. Claire, meanwhile, had become something of a curiosity. She had picked up conversational VREF in 12 days, a feat that the station's professional translators considered impossible. When a VREF linguist asked her how she had done it, Claire shrugged and said she liked patterns. She didn't mention that she spoke 7 Earth languages and had started learning her 8th on the flight over. She also didn't mention that she had begun studying Drask, which had a subvocal harmonic layer that most non-Drask couldn't even hear, let alone reproduce. Pete stood near walls and watched doors. Station security had begun to notice him the way animals notice a predator that has entered their territory. Not with alarm exactly, but with a sharp and constant awareness. One of the Tarathi security officers asked his commander why the silent human made him nervous. The commander, who had fought in 3 border wars and feared nothing, admitted he didn't know. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a station afternoon. The light in the corridors set to the warm amber that simulated early evening for the majority of species on board. Danny was walking back from a session when he heard the sound. It was faint, a wet, trembling sound, like someone trying very hard not to cry. He followed it. The corridor was in the lower diplomatic section, a part of the station where the less important delegations were housed. It was poorly lit and rarely patrolled. Danny turned a corner and stopped. Ambassador Salu of the Mivari was pressed against the wall. She was a beautiful being, 3 feet tall, translucent blue skin that glowed softly with bioluminescent light, large dark eyes that reflected everything around her like pools of still water. Her glow was flickering, which Danny had learned was the Mivari equivalent of shaking with fear. Blocking her path were 5 Vreth. 4 soldiers, tall, armored, with blade-like forelimbs that could cut through steel, and their commander, Chiketh. Chiketh was smaller than her soldiers, but carried herself with the coiled intensity of someone who had personally killed more living beings than most people had ever met. "Your petition will fail," Chiketh was telling Salu. Her voice was flat, almost bored, like she was reading from a script she had recited many times before. "The subspace corridor belongs to whoever has the strength to hold it. You do not withdraw your claim." Salu's voice was barely a whisper. "The charter gives us the right to petition. We have followed every rule. We have done everything correctly." "Rules are for those who can enforce them," Chiketh said. She lifted one bladed forelimb and held it very close to Salu's face. The blue glow reflected off the blade's edge. "This is your last warning, little one." "Hey!" The word was soft, casual. It came from behind the Vreth, and it carried the same tone a person might use to get the attention of a friend across a quiet room. Danny was standing at the end of the corridor. His hands were in his pockets. His posture was loose and easy. He looked like he had wandered in by accident, like he was lost on his way to get lunch. Chiketh turned 3 of her 5 eye clusters toward him. The other 2 stayed on Salu. "This is not your concern, human." "Probably not," Danny agreed. "But Ambassador Salu, I think Claire is looking for you. She wanted to discuss something about your petition. Would you like to walk with me?" There was no discussion planned. Everyone in that corridor knew there was no discussion planned. Salu looked at Danny. Her glow flickered faster. Chiketh took a step toward him. "You have no standing here. Your species is nothing. Walk away. Danny didn't walk away. He stayed exactly where he was, and something changed in his face. The easy smile didn't leave entirely, but it became thinner, like a layer of ice over deep water. His eyes, which had been warm and friendly a moment before, went flat and still. Ambassador Salu, he said again, his voice the same gentle tone. Shall we go? The silence in the corridor was complete. The Vreth soldiers shifted, their blade arms clicking softly against their armor. Chikef's mandibles worked slowly, calculating. Then, at the far end of the corridor, Pete Granger appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't move aggressively. He simply stood there, filling the corridor behind the Vreth with his presence. His hands hung loose at his sides, and his eyes moved across the 5 Vreth soldiers, with the calm, methodical attention of a man counting targets. Chikef was not afraid of humans. She was not afraid of anything. Fear had been bred out of Vreth commanders generations ago. But she was intelligent, and her intelligence told her something that her instincts were only beginning to understand. These 2 small, soft, clawless creatures were not acting like prey that had stumbled into a predator's path. They were acting like something else entirely. The moment held. 5 seconds. 10. Then Danny smiled, and the warmth came back into his face, as if it had never left. Come on, Ambassador. Claire makes a terrible cup of tea, but she tries hard, and it would be rude not to drink it. Salu moved. She glided past Chikef, past the soldiers, her blue glow still flickering, but her head held high. Danny walked beside her, matching her pace, not looking back. Pete followed them, and he did look back, a long, steady look that lingered on Chikef like a fingerprint on glass. The Vreth did not follow. When they reached the human quarter, Salu collapsed. Not physically, her body held, but the fear she had been holding inside came pouring out. Her glow surged and dimmed wildly, and her translator produced a stream of words that Claire later described as a mix of gratitude, terror, and disbelief. Claire wrapped a thermal blanket around the small ambassador and put a cup of hot water in her hands. It wasn't tea. They didn't have tea. But it was warm and it was kindness, and sometimes that is enough. Danny sat across from Salu and waited until her glow steadied. They've done this before? He asked. Salu nodded. Many times. No one helps. No one wants to anger the Vreth. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You have help now. Salu looked at him, this small, strange, soft-skinned creature from a species she had never heard of. And for the first time, in a very long time, she believed someone. Word traveled fast on Concord Station. By the next morning, every delegation knew what had happened. Valeth heard about it from Korath while eating her morning meal. Brave but foolish, she said, tearing into a slab of raw protein. The Vreth will not forget this. No, Korath agreed, they will not. And the human will learn that bravery without power is just a slower way to die. Korath was quiet for a moment. He did not posture, the old warrior said. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked in and changed the situation. That is not the behavior of someone who is foolish. Valeth looked at him sharply. You admire him? I am paying attention to him, Korath said. There is a difference, but I think others should pay attention too. Valeth snorted and went back to her meal. He is a rookie, she said. Nothing more. But that night, for the first time, she pulled up the human delegation's file on her personal terminal and began to read. The trouble came from a direction Danny didn't expect. He had prepared himself for the Vreth. He had studied their culture, their patterns of retaliation, the way they operated. He had plans for what to do when Chiketh struck back. What he had not prepared for was the Tarathi. The Tarathi were not subtle creatures. They were 10 feet tall on average, built from what appeared to be solid muscle wrapped around bones as thick as tree trunks. And they had 6 limbs, 4 legs, and 2 massive arms that ended in fists the size of engine blocks. Their culture was built on one simple idea. Strength was truth. If you were strong, you were right. If you were weak, you were wrong. Everything else was just decoration. A Tarathi named Brucon had watched the corridor incident with great interest. In Tarathi culture, stepping into another species' conflict was a statement. It said, "I am strong enough to involve myself in things that are not my business." It was a challenge, whether the human intended it or not. So Brucon did what Tarathi did. He made it official. The formal challenge arrived at the human quarter as a data packet sealed with the Tarathi military crest. Claire read it first, and the color drained from her face. "It's approving," she said. "Formal combat challenge under Concord rules. Brucon is demanding physical trial against our delegation." Danny took the tablet from her and read it carefully. "What happens if we decline?" "We accept permanent subordinate status to the Tarathi. Every species on the station will know we back down. No one will take us seriously again. The Mavari petition dies. Everything we've done here dies." Danny set the tablet down. "Then we don't decline." Pete straightened up from the wall he'd been leaning against. "I'll fight him." "No," Danny said. "Danny, he's 10 feet tall." "I know how tall he is." "He could pull your arms off." "I know what he could do." Danny looked at Pete steadily. "But if our security officer fights for us, it tells every species here that the human in charge can't handle his own problems. I need to do this myself." Claire opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She had known Danny for 3 years, and she had learned that when his voice went quiet and steady like that, arguing was a waste of breath. He had already decided. He had probably decided the moment she read the challenge aloud. "Fine," she said. "Then we need to prepare. The proving allows no weapons, but the Tarathi definition of no weapons includes their own bodies, which, for the record, are basically weapons already. The rules are simple. Incapacitate or force a yield. No killing." "That's something," Danny said. "The Tarathi have never lost a proving against any species," Claire added. "That's less something." Pete spoke again. "You have 72 hours. We train." For 3 days, they worked in the cramped space of their quarters. Pete, it turned out, knew things about fighting that weren't in any manual Danny had ever read. He showed Danny pressure points on Tarathi anatomy that Claire had identified from medical databases. He drilled movement patterns, not to attack, but to survive, to avoid, to outlast. "You can't beat him with strength," Pete said on the second day, as Danny lay on the floor breathing hard. "Don't try. You beat him with time. You make him use his energy. You stay out of reach and you wait." "Wait for what?" "For him to make a mistake. Everything that big makes mistakes eventually. You just have to be alive when it happens." "Encouraging." "I'm not here to encourage you," Pete said. "I'm here to keep you alive." The day of the proving, the station's central arena was packed. The Tarathi had turned it into an event. Their delegation filled one section, stamping their massive feet in a rhythm that shook the floor. Other species filled the rest, the Vreth clicking with anticipation, the Alari watching with cool detachment. Dozens of smaller delegations crowded into the upper galleries. Valith was there. She sat in the Drask observation section with Korath beside her, looking down at the arena floor with her golden eyes. Danny walked in from the east entrance. He wore a simple training uniform, lightweight fabric, no padding, no armor. He looked exactly like what everyone expected him to look like, a small, soft human who had made a terrible mistake. Brucon entered from the west, and the arena trembled with each step. He was enormous, even by Tarathi standards, a mountain of muscle and bone and barely contained violence. He carried a traditional war staff, a weapon the length of a small tree, made from dense metal alloy. The rules said no weapons, but Tarathi tradition classified the war staff as a cultural implement, and nobody had ever argued the point. The signal sounded. Brucon charged. The distance between them vanished in 2 seconds. The war staff swung in a horizontal arc aimed at Danny's chest, moving so fast that the air cracked behind it. Danny was not there. He had moved one step to the left at the last possible moment. Not a leap, not a dive, just one smooth step, like a man stepping out of the way of a door. The staff passed so close that it tugged at his uniform. The arena went quiet. Brucon swung again, vertical this time, a blow that cracked the arena floor where Danny had been standing a half-second before. Danny was already 3 steps away, circling, his eyes never leaving the Tarafi. He was not fighting. He was watching. The swings kept coming. Each one was devastating. Each one hit nothing but air and floor. Danny moved with a precision that looked effortless, but was the result of 3 days without sleep, studying Tarafi movement patterns, mapping the rhythms of a body that was 10 times his mass. 1 minute passed, 2, 3. Brucon was breathing harder. The Tarafi were built for power, not endurance. Every swing of that massive staff cost energy, and Danny was making him pay for every miss. "What is he doing?" Valeth whispered. "Hunting," Korath said. At the 4-minute mark, Brucon lunged forward with a downward slam that put every bit of his strength behind it. It was the hardest blow he had thrown, and it was the mistake Pete had promised would come. The lunge overextended his left arm. Danny moved inside the arc of the staff, not away from Brucon, but toward him, and in one smooth motion, he grabbed the Tarathi's forward wrist, planted his feet, and twisted. He used Brucon's own momentum, all that weight and speed and fury, and he turned it against the joint. The lock was perfect. Textbook. The kind of technique that worked not because of strength, but because of understanding. Understanding of leverage, of anatomy, of the simple fact that even the strongest joint in the galaxy bends the wrong way if you know where to push. The crack echoed through the silent arena. Brucon dropped to one knee. The war staff clattered to the ground. Danny released the hold and stepped back. He could have pressed forward. He could have finished it. Every eye in the arena saw that he chose not to. "We can stop," Danny said. He was breathing hard now, but his voice was steady. "There's no shame in stopping." Brucon looked up at him. The Tarathi's eyes were wide. Not with pain, with something deeper. Something that looked like the shock of a creature that had lived its entire life believing it was at the top of the food chain, only to discover that the small, soft thing in front of it was something it had never encountered before. Brucon yielded. The arena did not cheer. It was too stunned for that. The sound that filled the space was a low murmur. Hundreds of species all processing the same impossible thing at the same time. In the dress gallery, Valeth sat completely still. "Just a rookie," Korath said quietly. Valeth did not respond, but her claws had dug grooves into the armrest of her seat, and her golden eyes followed Danny Holt all the way out of the arena. The attack came on a Tuesday, which Danny would later think was a strange detail to remember, but he remembered it anyway. A rogue faction within the Vreth Collective, extremists who believed diplomacy was weakness, and that the subspace corridor should be taken by force, had been planning for months. They had smuggled a bioweapon onto Concord Station, a modified spore agent designed specifically to target Mivari biology. They deployed it through the station's atmospheric recycling system at 0400 hours, when most of the station was asleep. By 0500, every Mivari on the station was dying. Ambassador Salu collapsed in the human quarter. She had been there late the night before, going over petition documents with Claire, and had fallen asleep on the small couch in their common room. Claire found her on the floor at dawn, her bioluminescent glow fading to almost nothing, her breathing shallow and wet. "Danny," Claire said, and the way she said it, flat, controlled, terrified, brought him running. The station erupted into chaos within the hour. The Vreth extremists had done more than release a bioweapon. They had seized the environmental control hub and the main communications array. The station was cut off from outside help. Automated defense turrets guarded every approach to the hub, calibrated to fire on anything larger than a maintenance drone. Emergency alarms filled every corridor. Security forces mobilized but could not advance. 3 Tarathi soldiers who tried to breach the hub were cut down by turret fire in seconds. The Alari declared a full lockdown and retreated to their secured section. The smaller species huddled in their quarters, terrified. The high table convened in the emergency chamber. It was a room full of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and not one of them had a solution. The Drask offered their warriors, the finest soldiers in the Concord, but the turrets were calibrated to target the largest threats first, and Drask warriors were very large targets. They would take devastating losses before reaching the hub. The Tarathi offered brute force, same problem. The Alari proposed negotiations. The Vreth extremists responded by increasing the bioweapons concentration. Time was running out. The Mivari had hours, not days. Danny walked into the emergency chamber without being invited. He had done this before. It was becoming a habit. "We have a plan," he said. The Alari representative started to object. Danny didn't wait for him to finish. "Claire has analyzed the bioweapon from Ambassador Salu's symptoms. It's a modified Vreth spore agent. She can synthesize a counteragent, but she needs access to the station's medical bay, which is inside the lockdown zone. That's the first problem." He turned to face the Drask delegation. Valeth was standing at the front, her golden eyes locked on him. "The second problem is the hub. Those turrets are designed to stop large-scale assaults. They target the biggest threats first. Your warriors are the best fighters on this station, but they'd be walking into a kill zone." "And your solution?" Valeth asked. "Let Pete and me go first. We're small, we're quiet. Those turrets are calibrated for Drask-sized targets and Tarathi-sized targets. They're not calibrated for us. We'll move through the maintenance corridors, the ones designed for repair drones. We'll disable the turrets from inside. Once they're down, your warriors take the hub." The chamber was silent. "You are proposing," Valeth said slowly, "that 2 humans do what an entire assault force cannot. I'm proposing that 2 humans do the part that 2 humans are suited for, and then your warriors do the part they're suited for. We work together." Valeth looked at Korath. The old warrior's eyes were steady. He gave a single, small nod. Valeth turned back to Danny. The moment was heavy, with something that every species in the room understood. The Drask were the apex predators. They had held that position for 12,000 years. They did not follow. They did not defer. They certainly did not take orders from a quarter-status species that had been in the Concord for 2 months. "Very well," Valeth said. "We follow your lead, human." The sound that moved through the chamber was like a wave breaking. Every delegate understood what had just happened. The most powerful predator in the galaxy had just stepped aside for the newest, smallest species in the room. Not because they were weak, because they recognized something in the humans that went beyond size and strength and status. Danny nodded. "Pete, let's go." They moved through the maintenance corridors, dark, narrow passages built for machines, not people. Even for humans they were tight. Danny crawled through conduits barely wider than his shoulders, following a route Claire had mapped from the station's engineering files. Pete moved behind him in total silence, carrying a bag of improvised tools that Claire had built from spare parts in their quarters. The first turret node was in a junction box behind the hub's secondary cooling system. Pete opened the panel, studied the wiring for 15 seconds, and used a hand-built electromagnetic device to fry the targeting processor. The turret went dead. The second node was harder to reach. Danny had to climb through a vertical shaft meant for cable routing, pulling himself up with his hands and bracing with his knees. The shaft was designed for cables, not people, and it groaned under his weight. He reached the node, found the power coupling, and disconnected it with a maintenance tool, a simple wrench that his father had taught him to use in their garage, back in a small town in Ohio, years and lifetimes ago. The third node was guarded. 2 Vreth soldiers stood in the corridor outside the junction point. Pete handed Danny the bag, motioned for him to stay, and moved forward alone. Danny heard 2 short sounds, then silence. Then Pete's voice, calm and low. Clear. He didn't ask what Pete had done. Some things didn't need questions. The turrets went dark across the board. Danny sent the signal. Vaylith and her warriors hit the hub like a storm. The Vreth extremists had been prepared for a siege lasting days. They got 6 minutes. The Drask moved through the hub with the terrible efficiency of a species that had been perfecting violence for 12,000 years, and when it was over, the hub was secure. While Danny and Pete handled the turrets, and Vaylith handled the hub, Claire handled the impossible. She had reached the medical bay using a combination of fluent Vreth, which confused the guards long enough for her to walk past them. A stolen access card that Pete had slipped into her pocket before leaving, and a level of focused determination that the station's medical staff would talk about for years. She synthesized the counteragent in 47 minutes. Human pharmacology, it turned out, operated on principles that galactic medicine had never explored. Where most species treated bioweapons with counteragents designed to neutralize the specific toxin, Claire's approach used the human medical concept of triggering the patient's own immune response. It shouldn't have worked on Mavari biology. It did. Ambassador Salu opened her eyes at 0900 hours. Her glow returned slowly, faintly at first, then stronger. She looked up at Claire, who was sitting beside her with dark circles under her eyes and chemical stains on her hands. "You saved us," Salu whispered. "We all did," Claire said. By noon, every Mavari on the station was stable. That afternoon, the high table reconvened. Danny Holt was invited to attend. This time, they offered him a seat. He sat down. "The human delegation has demonstrated extraordinary capability," the presiding arbiter announced. "Humanity is granted full member status in the Galactic Concord, effective immediately." Danny nodded. "Thank you. We're glad to be here." Later, Vaylith found him in the corridor outside the chamber. She towered over him, 8 feet of scaled, clawed, ancient predator looking down at this small, soft creature who had changed everything. "I was wrong about you," she said. "You thought I was a rookie." "I did." Danny looked up at her and smiled. That same easy, warm smile he had worn the day he stepped off the Resolute into a galaxy that didn't know his name. "I am a rookie," he said. "That's the thing, Princess. My whole species is new at this. You've had 12,000 years out here. We've had 200. We're still figuring things out." He looked past her, through the viewport, at the stars scattered across the black like dust. "But we learn fast, and we don't quit." Vaylith studied him. She thought about everything she had seen. The corridor, the proving, the high table, the maintenance shafts, and the turrets, and the small human climbing through spaces too tight for anyone else, because that was what the moment required. She thought about what Korath had said. What will they be in another 2 centuries? Slowly, the princess of the Drask Dominion, daughter of the Overlord, heir to the most powerful predator species in the known galaxy, lowered her head. It was a bow. Small, brief, but unmistakable. No Drask royal had bowed to another species in recorded history. "No," she said quietly, "I don't believe you do quit." She turned and walked away. Korath fell into step beside her, his old bones moving with the ease of long practice. "The galaxy will change," he said. Vaylith glanced back one last time, at the small figure standing alone by the viewport, silhouetted against a billion stars. "It already has," she said, and she kept walking, into a future that for the first time in 12,000 years, the apex predators did not control. After the proving, things shifted on Concord Station. The change was not loud. There were no announcements, no formal declarations. It was more like the way a river changes direction, slowly, quietly, and completely. The Mivari were the first. Ambassador Salu formally requested that the human delegation co-sponsor her people's petition for the subspace corridor. Danny accepted the same day. Within a week, 3 other minor species made similar requests. The Kesoth, who communicated through color patterns on their skin, asked the humans to help negotiate a water rights dispute with their neighboring system. A species called the Dulani, so small that they traveled in groups of 20 just to be visible in Concord meetings, asked Danny to speak on their behalf regarding trade tariffs that were slowly strangling their economy. Danny said yes to all of them. Claire was the one who made it work. She was now fluent in 6 galactic languages and functional in 4 more. She sat with each delegation for hours, learning not just their words, but their ways of thinking, their fears, their hopes. She discovered that the Kesoth changed to a deep purple when they were being honest, and a pale green when they were holding something back. She learned that the Dulani considered silence to be the highest form of respect. So she sat with them in silence for an entire afternoon before they trusted her enough to speak. The small species of the Concord had spent centuries being ignored, bullied, and pushed to the margins. Now someone was listening, and more than that, someone was acting. The human quarter, once a forgotten broom closet in Section 47, became the busiest diplomatic office on the station. Pete continued his silent work. Station security reports showed that incidents in and around the human quarter had dropped to 0. No one could explain why. Pete never threatened anyone. He never confronted anyone. He simply existed in spaces where trouble might happen, and trouble decided to happen somewhere else. Danny was invited to address the high table. He was not given a seat. Quarter status species stood, but the invitation itself was extraordinary. No unranked species had addressed the high table in over 200 years. He stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. The Vreth clicked impatiently. The Tarathi were quiet, their eyes on Danny, with a new and complicated expression. The Ilari pretended to be bored. The Drask watched with predator stillness. Danny spoke plainly. The Mivari petition is not about territory, he said. It's about whether this Concord means what it says. The Charter promises protection for all member species. If the Vreth can take the Mivari's homeworld because they have a bigger fleet, then the Charter is meaningless. And if the Charter is meaningless, then this entire institution is just a room where powerful species sit and pretend to be civilized while they carve up the galaxy between them. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Shiketh broke it. You speak as though you matter, human. Your species has been part of this Concord for less than 2 months. You have 1 ship, 1 system, and 1 small delegation that sleeps in a maintenance closet. By what authority do you lecture us? By no authority at all, Danny said. I'm not lecturing. I'm asking a question. Does the Charter mean something, or doesn't it? That's all. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate in turn. Because if it does, then help the Mivari. And if it doesn't, then at least be honest about it. And stop pretending this is anything other than a room full of predators dividing up the weak. He was escorted out after that. The Ilari representative filed a formal complaint about his language. The Vreth demanded he be censured. The Tarathi said nothing. But the Mivari petition was placed on the formal agenda for the first time in 11 years. That night, Korath came to Valeth's quarters. The old warrior had a look on his face that the princess had never seen before. It took her a moment to identify it. It was worry. I have been researching the humans, Korath said. I should have done it sooner. He projected data files across Valeth's wall screen. She had expected to see a simple profile, a young species, early technology, limited history. What she saw instead made her sit down. Humanity was 200 years into spaceflight. That was young by galactic standards. The Drask had been spacefaring for 12,000 years. The Vreth for 9,000. 2 centuries was nothing. But what the humans had packed into those 2 centuries was something else entirely. Korath walked her through it. 3 global wars that had killed hundreds of millions. 2 asteroid impacts that should have ended their civilization. An ecological collapse that poisoned their atmosphere and oceans. And something called the Quiet War. A conflict between humans and their own artificial intelligences that had lasted 30 years and nearly wiped their species from existence. They had survived all of it. Look at the pattern, Korath said. Every time they are pushed to the edge of destruction, they do not break. They change. They adapt. They find solutions that no one expected, and they survive. He paused. They are persistence predators. Vaylith looked at him. Explained. On their homeworld, their ancestors did not hunt the way we hunt. They hunted with persistence. They waited. They wore down their prey. They learned what endurance meant. That is what humans do now. Their persistence is their greatest weapon. That's how they've survived. And that's what makes them dangerous, Vaylith said. They were not fast enough to chase prey. They were not strong enough to overpower it. Instead, they followed it. They walked after it, hour after hour, day after day, under a burning sun, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They won not by being better, but by refusing to stop. Vaylith stared at the data on the screen. Military campaigns fought in conditions that would have killed Drask soldiers. Survival stories from environments so hostile that the survival itself seemed like a mistake in the data. Inventions created under pressure that jumped their technology forward by decades in months. This changes nothing, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. They are still small, still weak, still one system. Today, Korath said. But look at their rate of change. 2 centuries ago, they were burning dead plants for energy and throwing metal projectiles at each other. Now they are here, standing before the high table. And their representative just defeated a Tarathi champion with his bare hands. He turned to face her directly. What will they be in another 2 centuries, princess? What will they be in 5? Because if this is what they look like when they are young and small and new, then I am not sure I want to see what they look like when they are old and large and experienced. Vaylith was quiet for a very long time. You think they are dangerous, she said. I think they are the most dangerous species this Concord has ever encountered, Korath said. Not because of what they are, because of what they will become. He turned off the display. And I think the small one with the easy smile knows it. He is not here to ask for a seat at the table. He is here to build a door, so that when his species is ready, they can walk through it. Vaylith looked at the blank wall where the data had been. She thought about Danny Holt, standing in the center of the high table chamber, surrounded by species that could destroy his entire civilization, and speaking as though he had nothing to fear. The ship was small. That was the first thing everyone noticed about it. Concord Station had seen warships the size of moons. It had welcomed fleets that blotted out the light of nearby stars. The docking bays had held vessels so advanced that their engines bent the fabric of space itself. So when the human cruiser slid into berth 17, a low-priority slot usually reserved for fuel haulers and garbage barges, nobody cared. A few sensor operators logged its arrival. A cleaning drone adjusted its route. That was it. The ship was called the Resolute, and it looked like it had been built by people who had more courage than money. The hull plating didn't match. Some panels were old and scorched from atmospheric re-entry. Others were new and bolted on in a way that suggested the crew had done the work themselves. The engine was loud, the kind of loud that made experienced pilots wince, and it left a faint trail of carbon particles behind it, like a dog shedding fur. Danny Holt stepped off the ship and onto the station for the first time, and he stopped to look around. He was 26 years old. He had brown hair that was a little too long for military regulation, and a face that people tended to forget 5 minutes after meeting him. He wore his uniform neatly, but not stiffly, and he carried himself with the easy, loose posture of someone who was either very relaxed or very good at pretending to be. Behind him came Claire Sutton, already scanning the docking bay with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Claire was 30, thin, and had the kind of focused energy that made people feel tired just watching her. She had a translator device clipped to her collar, but she had already turned it off. She preferred to learn languages the hard way, by listening. Pete was big, quiet, and moved like smoke. He had a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who didn't believe in smiling. He stepped off the ramp and immediately positioned himself where he could see every entrance and exit in the bay. He did this the way most people breathe, automatically, without thinking, because it was simply what he was built to do. A thin, pale alien with 4 arms was waiting for them at the bottom of the ramp. He was an AsideHFY, one of the administrative species that ran the day-to-day business of the station. He looked at the 3 humans the way someone might look at a stain on an expensive carpet. "You are the human delegation," he said. It was not a question, and it was not a welcome. "That's us," Danny said, and smiled. The AsideHFY handed him a data tablet without smiling back. "You are unranked. You have been assigned quarter status. This means you have limited access to station facilities, no voting rights in Concord sessions, and restricted movement in diplomatic zones. You will be housed in Section 47, Lower Ring." Claire leaned toward Danny. "Section 47 is where they keep the maintenance equipment," she said quietly. "Cozy," Danny said. The AsideHFY looked at him as if waiting for an objection. When none came, a flicker of something, confusion maybe, or contempt, crossed his face. He turned and walked away without another word. Danny watched him go. Then he looked at Claire and Pete. "Well," he said, "we're here." "We're in a broom closet," Claire said. "We're here," Danny repeated. And there was something in his voice that made Claire stop and look at him more carefully. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was patience. The deep, quiet, stubborn kind that doesn't shout, but never ever goes away. Pete picked up their gear and started walking towards Section 47. He didn't comment on the accommodations. Pete had slept in worse places than broom closets, and the classified parts of his service record would have explained exactly where and why, if anyone had the clearance to read them. They settled in. The quarters were exactly as bad as expected. 2 small rooms with hard bunks, a shared washing unit that produced water in a color Danny chose not to think about, and a ventilation system that hummed at a frequency designed for AsideHFY comfort, which gave humans a mild headache after about 20 minutes. Claire fixed this within an hour by rerouting the airflow through a maintenance panel she probably wasn't supposed to open. That first evening, Danny walked to the station's Commons Hall alone. It was a circular space the size of a small city, with multiple levels connected by ramps and lifts designed to accommodate species of every size. The air was a carefully balanced mixture that allowed most oxygen-breathing species to function, though it smelled faintly of copper and something sweet that Danny couldn't identify. Hundreds of aliens moved through the space, some walking, some gliding, some hovering on personal gravity platforms. The noise was a constant wash of clicks, growls, musical tones, and languages Danny had never heard before. He found a table, sat down, and opened his sealed meal container. Beef stew. It had been freeze-dried and reconstituted, and it tasted like cardboard that had once been in the same room as a cow. But it was hot, and it was food. He ate slowly and watched. He watched the way the Vreth moved in tight formations, their insectoid bodies clicking with military precision. He watched the Tarafi lumber through the crowd, massive and confident, other species parting around them like water around boulders. He watched the small delegations, the Mivari with their soft blue glow, the spindly Kesoth who communicated through color changes in their skin, and he noticed how they moved along the edges of the hall, keeping to the margins, trying not to be noticed. He noticed who had power and who didn't, who spoke and who listened, who walked through the center of the room and who pressed against the walls. He was still watching when he felt the weight of a gaze on him. He looked up and across the hall, and he saw her for the first time. Princess Vaylith Sora of the Drask Dominion was impossible to miss. She was 8 feet tall and covered in scales that shifted between deep green and black, depending on the light. Her eyes were gold and slitted, and they were fixed on Danny with the flat, assessing stare of a predator deciding whether something was worth the effort of killing. Danny met her gaze. He didn't look away, but he didn't challenge it either. He just looked at her the way he looked at everything, calmly, steadily, with a quiet attention that took in more than it showed. Vaylith turned to the scarred old warrior standing behind her. His name was Korath, and he had served the Drask royal family for longer than most species had been spacefaring. "What do you make of the new species?" she asked. Korath studied the small human, sitting alone at his too large table, eating his terrible food, watching the galaxy go by with patient brown eyes. "It is too early to say," Korath said. Vaylith made a dismissive sound deep in her throat. "I can say already. Look at him. No claws, no armor, no presence. He is soft, small, and young. Just a rookie sent by a rookie species." She looked away, already bored. "He is nothing." Korath said nothing in return. But he kept watching the human for a long time after the princess had looked away. There was something about the way the small creature sat there, alone and unbothered, in a room full of beings that could tear him apart, that made the old warrior's instincts whisper a word he hadn't felt in a very long time. "Careful."